Welcome to Dynamics of Dialogue, your one-stop shop for peace and love on the airwaves, a safe space for people of color and our allies. Join us every week as we have real dialogue with people going through real life. Your dynamic, your dialogue. Come get some. Welcome to Dynamics of Dialogue. This is your host, Rebel Queen, and I'm here in the studio with Catherine Knight and Takesha Smith and Elle Lachey Farmer, and we are continuing our conversation on racism and mental illness, and there's all the nuances that go to it, and we were just moving into the stage of the conversation. We've talked about a lot of the hurt and how hurt people, and you know how all of us this system is perpetuated by all of this misery of people kind of finding their place in the system. And Catherine was sharing a story about her spirituality that kind of connected this for her. So, Catherine?
Okay. Thanks, Ty. Well, I was sharing that part of my approach to trying to become anti-racist, to trying to perpetually see from the experience of outside of my training as a white supremacist. I mean, that is what basically I was brought up to believe, that either unconsciously or consciously. And earlier you talked about intent, and we got to be careful about intent because that doesn't let people off the hook for the systemic problem. The issue of whether we're good or not shouldn't exactly come into play with whether we're racist or not, because racism is a benefit system, a benefit and denial of benefit system. It's a power dynamic, always. Power is always at the heart of it. And power in our culture is a moneyed power. But I want to talk about a different kind of power. And this is why white people should listen, is that there is a spiritual power that is growing, I believe, that believes in community and believes in authenticity and actual truth where it matters, and actual facts still matter. Shouldn't have to say that out loud, but really, in this time where we're living, I feel like we're running out of time in sort of a Christian mystic kind of way. My psychological breakdown had me looking at the systems, within which we lived, and taking a reckoning and an atonement for what things I couldn't control, but things I've still benefited from. Things that I was taught in my genealogy. My beloved grandmother who's passed gave me a 14 generation from the Isle of Man, going back to 1845, genealogy. But never in all her years did she ever speak of the impact that was having on people of color, those generations of white people. In fact, it was a delusional view because we would romanticize it, just like Gone with the Wind or different stages of white culture having a goodness that belied the actual Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde elements of it, right? And we have to get real and real fast, because I feel that and this is a positive thought, but that the world is coming to a recognition. We are a global society now, more and more. This idea of boundaries or colors, or that we're not all children of God, equal and entitled to dignity, the basics of the Maslow hierarchy of needs.
Right.
The basics, shelter, warmth, some good health care. These are community Security. Values.
Yes.
If you don't have them, you've become or are still inhumane.
Yes.
Right. And see, this right here is the heart.
Perfectly said.
It's perfectly said. And for me, it brings up a couple of things: the spiritual journey, and again, I don't want to make it sound like a weird space, but I think we're in a place where a lot of people are in a spiritual awakening. Not necessarily, I don't mean God and the Bible. I mean a spiritual awakening, an inner awareness. A lot of us are going back because as the conversations about past traumas and hurts continue to come up, people are going back to revisit the inner child, as you talked about. And as a part of that process of revisiting the inner child, it becomes spiritual. So in that, we have these elements of understanding how we've been affected, literally spiritually, by, this perpetuated racism from generation to generation to generation. For me, it adds another layer to it. Because
it has to stop. It's like generational abuse of any kind.
Yes.
It has to stop with me.
Right.
It has to. We have to. And I don't know what that means for my individual life, except that I take it from. And I want to finish this one weird story that I started before. But I was out in the rural Georgia, speaking to, doing a RAP, which is called Wellness Recovery Action Plan for basic self-care for people who are in mental hospitals and day programs, and something I do. And this man, who's a white man, approached me and said, a lot of people, you have a lot of danger around you. Because I do speak out, and I am someone who kind of kicks the hornet's nest these days. It's a little oppositional defiance disorder.
Welcome to the club. That's what we all do.
Yeah,
right.
me too.
I speak when I probably,
yes.
but that's the giving up the silence and giving up the fear, which is
That's
complicity.
right.
Frailty and fear is complicity. So I'm going to say this weird story, which is this man approached me and said, "You've got to keep speaking." And he wasn't talking like he himself was a white farmer, from Middle Georgia. I don't know what his, but he was sort of channeling, and he said, "Don't tell anybody, they locked me up for this kind of talk, but listen, you need to keep talking." He'd said nothing during my whole seminar practically, okay? But we had a little conversation, but that's it. He was carrying my stuff out, and he said, "Look, lady, you just got to keep talking because I'm just telling you, you've got like 250 people behind you on horseback who are guarding you. And these people are from 1865, around that time." And, my grandmother, this same grandmother that wrote this letter that I gestured, because I have a daughter who's 21, who's a Catherine of these 14 generations from the Isle of Man.
Oh, wow.
Of colonizers, right? Okay, but I'm calling it out. And so that same grandmother, oh, God, I just lost my train of thought.
The grandmother of the story, the cavalry, 250 cavalry behind you.
That, romanticizing that whole white history, right, which is what I was steeped in, but also owning, that we were there and we didn't do right, but we can atone. Like, I don't know if there's actually a cavalry of civil. See, I believe that these guardian angels are doing some atonement because they were keeping black people down after they ran off the Indians, right? And or the Native Americans, I should say. And so I think there's this understanding that I don't know how, I don't know all the ways in which a reckoning happens. I don't know, what happens with reparations, what happens in using the model of South Africa. I don't know. It's kind of been rocky. There's all different ways of trying to atone for the white people's oppression, but it doesn't go anywhere until you acknowledge it in history. The absence of that is a delusion, and it hurts people. Like I say, okay, you may think I'm schizoaffective at times or whatever because I see and hear things, like I have visions and.
Not necessarily.
But
no.
My belief is that those are gifts that people, because I think
Dangerous
people have been through things.
Mad
you
pride.
learn how to cultivate gifts. Yes, and we're going to talk about mad pride when we wrap up the show.
Yes. Well, so I'm proud of my new vision, my new lens.
I like
which,
that. Your new vision.
Yes.
Yes. You
and
can't operate out of the same vision, out of the same lens.
And you can't change it again. Like once you see,
you can't unsee what you've seen.
Yeah, the inequality.
Yeah.
The strata. And I know I played a role in that strata, right? But I also believe, because I've experienced it and survived white male domination.
Congratulations.
Right? And I have crawled out of that.
You made it,
right?
Yeah. But you made it out.
And
thank
that's an
God.
accomplishment.
Yes. You crawled out, but
is.
you made it out.
Yes. But I'm still steeped in, I'm with a white man now. I'm learning with him, all this stuff. But we got to just keep remembering that the hierarchy is where the failure is. That's what Jesus really says. I mean, at every level, Jesus says he says it in terms of their individual locality, because people don't have to
That
look
is
different.
true.
You can have
So
Shia
many levels.
Muslims and Sunni Muslims. You don't have to look different to hate
No,
each other.
no.
But hate is bad for looking at someone as other. As soon as you otherize somebody, you're doing some lessening possibly. You're doing the superiority shit. And it's got to be untrue.
And it not only is it untrue, but when you're operating in a place that is out of alignment with your spiritual purpose, it's damaging.
Yes,
It is a painful, right? Because you see so, and it's so. I wanted to really just bring light to that there is. I believe there is a spiritual aspect to it because I think any of us who have experienced racism and hatefulness, I know I've looked into a white racist Irish cop's eyes and just felt the steel cold hate. You can feel it. That's a spirit.
in that, yeah.
That's
Well,
a
let's talk
spirit.
about
That's
othering.
Yeah.
Let's talk about othering because the core part of othering is identity. Because if you feel like someone is different from you, it's an identity situation. You have this identity that you created through culture, history, books you've read, people told you stories, whatever. You have this idea of who you are as a person. It starts when you're a child, which is why the inner child is so important because that shapes who you are. So if you have 1865 racists teaching you who you are,
Right.
and then you have someone come up at you that's a totally different appearance from you, the way they act, the way they look, the way they eat, the way they smell, everything is different from you. You are now faced with the paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Am I going to be who I am, or am I going to be this new person? People are not willing to be that new person. So my question to you, you did share that when you had family that known slaves, that you had certificates for it and everything. When you learned that that was part of your culture, how did that shape your identity?
I think as I was growing up and was taught this, we were taught it was bad in theory in Atlanta, like this liberal education that I was taught. I mean, I went back in Mississippi. I was raised here in Atlanta. So we had in the 1970s, again, you have to put everything in, because I like to remind people, we're in 2019 and we don't have time for a lot of the stuff we were putting up with in the 70s, right? But in the 70s, I learned that was something to be proud of. I mean, that's white supremacy. I was taught that was valuable, and that that is what you're taught. Well, and it's implicit too because it's in every book. It's every Dick and Jane book. It's everything. You may have one friend who's African American, and even then, there's all sorts of segregation that goes on within that. Right within their families and our white families. Right. I remember having a friend who went in middle school. And we had a black guy in our class, and we went over to his house, and a white friend of mine who went with me, and we left, and she goes, "Oh my God, that was so different." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because they had black people on the walls." I'm just going to pause for a minute.
Yeah, I was going to let you. Okay. Because that's deep. That's heavy.
Whoa.
That's different.
And the same friend who should know better, and later at one point asked me when we were in the Civil War movie, like Gettysburg, I think it was, who won? Like the chosen ignorance of how things turned out. But let me say this. There's, in terms of the guilt, the huge wave of guilt, it's also the extent to which I don't know what's going on in Yemen right this minute. I don't know what's going on in, like, they're being wiped out, right? I don't really know, because that's how irrelevant it felt. And I don't mean to say that's hurtful probably to hear, but at the same time, it's like a cult. I was told it didn't matter. And of course it mattered.
These are people.
Because these are people in my community.
Right.
And I am one of them, right? And so I had to kind of I had to be tossed out. It's like a bird from the nest of white supremacy.
How do you heal a culture where the cultural identity is so heavily tied to violence and hate? How do you, start that conversation of, hey, we did this too?
Yeah. Well, okay, because I walked in talking about Stone Mountain, which is closed for Super Bowl weekend, and we like to talk about where, Forsyth County or what have you, but just down the road, we got some KKK who identify strongly with the figures on the front of that mountain, right? And, we can find racism anywhere you look. You just look, right? So here, I walked in talking about how I don't feel hopeful of having those conversations.
Right.
Like, whenever I've confronted anyone about, that is really, like, evil. Because at some point, dehumanizing anyone is evil.
It
allows you to perpetuate evil.
Yes.
Be it through physical abuse.
Yes.
Be it through...
It breaks humanity at any and all points when you dehumanize anybody.
Anyone, in any culture. Right?
Anybody in any culture.
We have to find a way. If we all lived on little islands where we only looked like just each other, that, would be a different socio scenario.
Right.
But we live here.
Right.
And all over the world, it's diversity is what is valuable right now.
It is.
It is the truth because it is carrying lots of stories. And I just feel, here's the thing about the haves and the have-nots, and this is where the celebration comes from, is that I couldn't go back, but I wouldn't go back to the country clubs and even the pursuit of money over authenticity, because there's a buy-in, in a way, into that capitalist society, which is not feeding the community. And I feel we're losing, and we shouldn't need to, if we could see the humanity in each other and find the meekness and find the value in having the courage of having been survived.
Because we've all survived
Right.
white supremacy. And one thing about what you said about the poverty, if we're busy fighting about who's gay, who's black, who's white, who's a man, who's a woman, we're not arguing about who's poor. We're not identifying that we are all in the same economic position.
If the division hurts us more than the union, if we realize that really it's about how can we lift and support a humane society of a lot of diversity. That's not going away.
And see, this is the principle. This is the premise of beloved community.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
Beloved community where there's no poverty, because you cannot have beloved community where poverty exists, because when there's poverty, people are suffering, right? There's no racism. That's right. There's no racism. There's no separation, no misogyny. None of that exists in beloved community, and that's really one of the principles that I've built Official DFD podcast community on, creating that space. It is a safe space. But in that safe space, that doesn't necessarily mean, like, we have a lot of safe spaces, and boy, I know it may take some heat for saying this, but a lot of safe spaces right now look like they're free of white people because of the microaggressions.
That's true.
But this is a safe space that I'd like to include not just white people, but all of our allies and accomplices, because if we want to see our society transform, then we have to create that space for that transformation to take place in. So that means that people that have a sense of understanding and willingness, that are willing to sit down and come to the table, and that are willing to say, okay, I'm willing to hear you without judgment, and let's have this conversation. We're going to have this community and have these meaningful conversations here where we can all grow and learn.
Like when you were introducing yourself, Lachey, I just thought, you exude coolness.
Oh, I'm cool.
Okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I
was thinking
cool.
you're appropriate for your, to be a brand manager kind of thing. And so, and you bring that consciousness and awareness to that. And what I think, nobody changes if you yell in their face.
No, it does not work.
It
So
doesn't work with my
not the safe
father,
space.
and it doesn't
Yeah.
work with any husband I've had, and
Yeah.
it doesn't work with
no.
or women.
Or women.
White women are going to cry. They're not going to get it. They're not, okay. But if you create spaces where white women can come in, and this is where the Chicago dinners I've been going to, and the cultural classes, and and I have heard women say, like, when I go in those spaces and listen to white women, and I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm so woke, because I'm sure 10 minutes later someone else is hearing me say something wrong, really offensive and possibly. But I'll hear people say things that are so offensive, and I'll think, God, those women or men of color are keeping, like, so much bearing. Yes.
Internalizing.
Because I can see it now. Not always, but I can see the diss. I can see the the I'm really better than you, and I'm pitying you, or I'm still othering you, even in those safe spaces.
Right.
So, but you have to invite us in. I'm begging. I'm kind of asking for, I mean, this is where white women without crying need to say we need forgiveness, because we've got to ally. I mean, it's not even a choice. And I don't know, I may be an early adopter in some of my communities, but I do believe that those people don't want to be evil. I think that they're so invested in white supremacy, they don't see it.
It's their
but
lives.
if they can start to see it.
Too correlated to the identity. You
Yeah.
have to let your entire identity go if you stop believing what you've been taught all your life.
And
that's
she
heavy.
touched on that
That's
earlier
heavy.
because she talked about her friends,
Yeah.
about losing so many friends and how the new friendships are so meaningful because you
Well, and
that's a whole
family,
nother transformation when you lose what what was associated with your inner child or your foundation years for a long time. And what also touches into that, something else I've gotten into is yoga and a little bit of practice of Buddhism. All right, Buddhism is not a religion. And I have to say this again, Buddhism is not a religion. It is a practice. But one of the things I've learned to combine that with that practice in yoga with the work that I do is that it is important to stay active. And within your activity is love. That's what I'm hearing. Love has to be a part of that safe space and that open-mindedness. You're not going to be able to change people who don't have love and open-mindedness. Yeah. Period. That's not going to happen.
It's like don't even devote your energy to that. Play your strengths. There are some low-hanging fruit, and the women who are progressive I think there's hope, to like learn, and why these things it's necessary. But, at the same time, you just have to be strong in who you are, because some people are not going to you can't do it.
But the diversity, which is activity, and this is something we know in the profession, that will be if we're going to classify racism as a mental illness, but activity, which I will define as diversifying these conversations, these open spaces, is going to be your best antipsychotic.
Yes. Very good.
That is going to be the best.
And therapy has to be, and that's exactly what I was going to say. Therapy, because if racism is, then really, in order to really even tackle it, you can't. We say this in mental health all the time. Nothing about us without us. Yeah. You can't begin to have any kind of therapy dealing with recovering or understanding Black people without us present.
Great.
Without
point.
authentic.
And don't tell us how to feel. Like that is even a conversation I've had to have with, and I don't mind openly discussing this with a supervisor. I have a white woman who is a supervisor, and I'm assuming that she is a progressive white woman. But it is when I have the conversation with her about me being a Black woman and my experiences, even as a leader within my agency, there's an automatic shutdown, and then there's a well, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's the case. That's the situation. But how would you know? There's nobody there that represents me on the leadership panel, on the executive team. How many conversations have you had with me?
Yes.
I need to be in the room when you're having these conversations. Who in that room represents me?
Representation matters. And that's exactly, so I just want to bring everybody present to the fact that within the official DFD Hangout, we are offering courses, workshops, and I'm so happy to announce that we're bringing One Small Changes cultural competency workshops to our network, because that's exactly what it's for, right? And I'm sharing the Dinner with Friends events because these are so important. Yeah, these are great spaces, right? Lachey and I just went a couple of weeks ago and had
Chicago dinners.
The Chicago dinners. You rarely get a time to sit with people who don't look like you and ask honest questions and have honest dialogue and get honest responses in order to get solutions. You don't get that.
Right.
So thanks to One Small Change for
and a
creating
safe
that.
space.
Yes,
because that has to happen. And people whose intentions are not to bring about healing, hope, health, love, and wellness, which that was a little personal plug there. They're not going to show up anyway. Yeah. But just like hate is contagious, so is love.
So is
love.
Right.
So it's more powerful. Good does win in the end, and I don't know when the end is, because I get a lot of. Like my Christian sort of mystic psychic side will be a little apocalyptic every now and then with what's going on in this world. But go ahead. Yes, on the apocalypse note.
I'm sorry. Oh, no.
It is getting a little end of the world around here.
I didn't want to, but
Getting a little last days out here.
no, but no, really, the thing, because what came up for me is that I can see a lot of people. I already know, right? There's going to be a lot of us that are listening to this conversation and saying, I'm not loving no racist. I'm not doing this. With this more that love is the answer. But here's what I can understand, and this is why I relate all of these together, right? So I'm a person who has lived through trauma, complex trauma, right? So this is repeated, cyclic, type of things. And I look at it in this form, right? The object doesn't necessarily matter as much as the experience. In my experience, I've had to deal with things that if I didn't allow forgiveness in, it was eating me alive. And I see that alive in racism, right? When you don't allow that in your heart, it will eat you alive. Forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. It's the same thing with being able to evolve into a place of love. Loving a person who is really, what we would kind of consider a degenerate, somebody who is hateful, that's not for them, it's for you.
And that's some next level. If you think about it, that's a breakthrough for you. Yeah. And that's some next level shit. And I'm going to say this. The experience is equivalent to the journey.
That's
as the object is to the outcome. It's not about the outcome or the object. It's about the journey.
Because it's about the journey. And the only way, one of the things I found is that I'm a person that's been damaged by racism at a very early age, right? My first grade teacher called me the N-word. I said that so racism, sexism, all of these different things. And because I'm giving out my space to it, right? Because part of being systematically discriminated against is a sense of helplessness. In helplessness, you lose your power. So if I allow myself to continue to hate these things, if I allow myself to be burdened down with that anger, in order to hate it, I have to carry it.
Yep.
You gotta carry it.
And it's going to take
feed it.
And
you got to nurture it.
And that takes some of my energy and it takes some of my power. And when I started shifting and focusing all of my energy into, okay, I got to forgive because I can't carry this around anymore. It's making me sick. And I started realizing, okay, I need to add love to that component because now that needs to transform my heart. I said I felt like the Grinch whose heart, opened a mile wide, right? Once I incorporated that love, I found now for me, I'm more powerful because I'm giving less of my energy and effort. My energy is not focused on, I'm mad at these white people, I'm going to go out here and stand in the street and protest, and I am not putting that down. I believe it is necessary. But it is transformed from that to, I'm going to create this space, right, where we're going to heal. Black people going to heal. We're going to support each other. We're going to invite our allies in. And I'm going to create a space for those who want to change.
Right.
And heal. Now, which is more powerful?
Which is more revolutionary?
Which is more revolutionary?
Which is more revolutionary? And it's important to say that.
Yeah.
And you can be woke. And I said this, I think, in a few past episodes. There are a lot of people out here who's woke, but they ain't conscious. All right. You can be awake and on autopilot because that's what a lot of them are. But how conscious are you? And what is your activity, all right, behind that level of consciousness? And that's what I hear you saying now. That's your activity is creating this safe space for that to happen.
And we have to define, because I know people who, like white people who are in the cultural education business, like the cultural competency business, who will go and get, a truck with a Confederate flag on it.
Yeah.
Right? While managing African Americans.
Right.
Totally
they don't separate the offense.
That's in law enforcement. We see it all the time in law enforcement. That's happened, deep in
here. There's so much pride in that Confederate flag. They can't separate their identity from, how it
it's
that
2019.
And we're sensitive if we say something about it.
Well,
so.
Yeah. No, I know.
And that's why it's so important.
Or it's dangerous to say something about
That's right. That's why it's so important that we have to understand when we're talking about racism, particularly with white people understanding, it's not about just us and them. Even the art of war, right? If you are a person who feels like, this is the enemy, even the art of war says you're supposed to know your enemy.
You are.
You study your enemy.
You are.
Right.
That's true.
But they don't know.
But if you but that flag is so. I hate to keep talking about this flag. We talk about this flag all the time, but it's so correlated to conservative identity.
Yes,
it's so.
It's all.
They
identity.
think that it's so like we're attacking their identity and their culture by saying pull down these Confederate soldiers who lost the war and pull down this flag.
Well, you are attacking.
Yeah, I was
them.
going to say.
Absolutely. I'm not saying I'm not.
Yeah.
But the fact that you
Because
feel
we need to
offense.
why isn't it not courageous to say I'm ready to change? Like that is being stuck in the past is a really weird thing. We rightly lost the war. We lost it.
Lost
yeah.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's
For
common
a good
knowledge.
reason.
Badly.
Right.
We all
Yeah.
read about it.
So
in the
all
book.
these Confederate flag supporters, you lost the war. You got your ass kicked badly. I don't know if
Let
I
it
want to be
go.
associated with that, but okay, let's just say that you do. But it's just like
But
you
we're
were
going
saying,
on centuries
yeah,
are passing,
it's,
right?
It's the
Like
past.
we
it's a has what now
Yes.
at this point,
Right.
Yeah.
And it needs to be in museums. I mean, like I was going to say, I have,
Right.
I mean, seriously, I don't even know if you want it in museums. Like, I have a relative, that
It should. The
grandmother,
story needs to be
put,
told.
Yeah.
put some my Confederate grandparents, great, sorry, whatever, died on Kennesaw Mountain. Funny, not funny, it's not funny, but a tree fell on, after fighting against, abolishing slavery. So, but this needs to, his artifacts are in the
karma.
Kennesaw Museum. But that doesn't mean we need to celebrate. That's what they did.
That's the
what they
thing.
did.
There's a fine
and
line
they shouldn't have
between
done that.
knowing
right?
and
celebration
celebrating is two
and
different
putting the knowledge
yeah.
out.
Yes.
I think we need to know. For me,
you
I'm
can't
comfortable with
ignore
knowing.
it. It's
No.
important to know.
That is a very
But
good
I
point,
want to
Catherine.
know.
It's a very good point.
I think we need to know. It should be mandatory that we know. But just
Yes,
like it needs
just
to be
like
mandatory.
in Germany after the Holocaust, they were mandated after when they lost the war to learn all the time about cautionary tales towards fascism, which is fueled by racism because you divide all the poor people like we were talking about before, and it's really it's time to become conscious now. Like we don't have a lot another century. We gotta. There's a lot of issues that affect communities, infrastructure,
Infrastructure, that's right.
climate change, and that are not going to benefit just the rich people. Like we got to look at capitalism just ate us up. Like that is the white man's dream, right?
It is.
That-
It is.
it
That-
is.
I'm not just going to say just the white man, but anybody with a business sense. Because
Yeah.
my husband, who is a black man, he's an accountant by profession. He's a very black and white numbers driven person. Okay. And to some degree, and this has been a debate within my household with him, he supports capitalism. But I'm like, it doesn't support shit about you and yours, which is crazy to me. But they do. It's a
It's
mindset.
an individualism that we bought into.
I
Sorry.
think
Yeah,
so. No, and I
agreed.
think
Yeah.
that this is why I think it's important that I think that a very significant change that needs to take place for us to combat racism and such is to really we now need to start transforming the language that we use and even how we identify ourselves.
Absolutely.
To go back to the conversation about how white lady was being used as an insult from one white woman to another. I mean, Trevor Noah is genius. And the piece, I mean, it was hilarious, but it
gotta
was
see
like,
that.
if for me, as a black person, it caused this dissonance. Like, what am I looking at? What is this saying when white women are using that word, your own assumed identity
Well,
to
but I
insult
think
each
I'm
other.
guilty of that.
But see, but
Because
here's the
on
thing.
What word
Facebook-
were they
but
using?
White women, white lady.
Okay, just white lady. They were
Right?
just
She was
telling-
like, white lady, get away. I'm like, what?
And it was offensive
It was
to
a
say.
clip.
I gotta
Yes,
see it.
it was. And she was like,
Okay.
because it was a white lady that was trying to say, harassing a black lady and her kid. Another other white lady walks up and starts shaming her, like, "What are you doing? Mind your business. Leave them alone." And then the white lady who's doing the offending calls her a white lady, and I'm like, "What am I? What's
What am
happening?"
I
Like,
watching?
that's- I
Right,
might
but
not be
see-
following it, but I think that needs to happen. If the
Well,
calling
but
out,
I think it does. No, the calling out part needs to happen. But what was present for me is that really, what is whiteness, right? One of the cultural competency dinners. I mean, the dinner with friends events we went to. I connected with a gentleman who shared with me now, all about all intents and purposes, he is identifies as a white person in the society, but his background was Italian, but he didn't speak Italian. And where he lives in a very, very white part of the U.S., he is a second-class citizen. So that is the first time in my life that I've seen a white man, come to me and verifiably identify as a second-class citizen, because he's going to be a second-class citizen and get compared to somebody like you. Because he's got
waspy background.
The waspy background. And one of the things that so for me, I think that part of what we need in order to really connect with ourselves and really eradicate racism is the type of work that Dr. Skip Gates is doing.
Yes.
Henry Louis Gates is doing.
Yeah.
Because helping these people connect. So really, it's not that he's white, he's Italian.
But he is benefiting. I mean, he's doing a lot of benefiting.
He's doing a lot of benefiting,
from
but
white
he's
privilege.
also recognizing for him what it brought was that even with my benefiting, I'm a second-class citizen.
Well, and that is
there's
sort
still
of
a hierarchy.
where
There's
that
a
is
hierarchy.
where I landed, right?
Yes.
And that's because I landed in the mental health system in poverty,
Mm-hmm.
and I immediately realized no one. I had my privilege. I couldn't trade on it. Not at all. I'm going to say it's still there, right?
Yep.
But it was gone enough for me to go, holy shit.
And privilege is currency. I'm glad you said that.
It's
It
a
is currency.
malleable currency.
I'm glad
Yes,
you
it
mentioned
that I
is.
had always traded on to live in that bubble.
Yes.
Right? In that bubble. Even because Michelle Obama wrote this about how in South Chicago, she didn't have to deal with white people like she did until she got to Princeton.
Right.
And in some ways, that was a little bit my experience.
That was nice too.
Really?
Until I
Yeah.
got to college.
Yeah.
I didn't have to work or deal with white people until I got to college. And I went to a PWI for my undergrad and then an HBCU for my grad.
Or
and my graduate.
PWI, private white institution,
Yeah.
HBCU, historically black.
I knew
college
the second.
university.
I knew the second acronym.
Okay, my bad. I'm sorry.
No,
But yeah,
but that's important.
that's true.
Go ahead.
But I can relate to that, and that was an experience within
Yes,
itself.
it's eye-opening.
Yeah, it was very eye-opening because I will say being raised around and cultured around people that look like me, that supported me, that, and then to go into an environment that barely saw me was a kick in the gut.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine being a child growing up in that. You don't know, you don't have an inkling of who you are, no confidence, no nothing. But I had the privilege, because that was a privilege in this country, of growing up with the support of that. And then I then realized how privilege is a currency, and it's equated to resources, and resources allows for access.
That's right. Well, I mean, and I learned quickly, like psychiatrically disabled, if you're rich, you're eccentric.
Oh, yeah.
If you are poor, you are
Crazy.
You're going to
turn
be
like crazy.
institutionalized, possibly shot in the street. You're not going to be treated. You're
You're
not going to get the
a
right
threat.
medical care. You're scary.
Your threat, your nuisance.
Scary.
I can tell you as a professional, that's exactly, and I will call out my professional community because we continue to perpetuate a lot of the stigma. Working for community service boards versus private inpatient institutions, you have one that is, their sole purpose is to come in and collect your money. So if you got good health insurance or you got cash money, you're going to come in and get some decent health care. If you do not, if you are poor, you will go to a community service board in any state and you're going to get treated in a shitty fashion. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But that's what it is.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
It's inhumane.
It's
really.
inhumane.
Because they don't. So I, for the first time, was not seen as a human. And that is interesting, right? I mean, I think white men, well, I don't know. Some white men, I'm not sure, they certainly saw me as lesser than them. And
They saw you as
deserving
weak.
of.
That's what
Yeah.
I've heard them say. She's just
And
being a victim and
controllable
weak.
and, and abusable, right?
Yeah.
So, and when you abuse someone, you don't see them as valuable as you.
One thing
right?
about that correlation you made, about how you felt like you were seen differently for the first time, because of the poverty.
Right.
The race
It was a
wasn't able to
have-not.
carry you into that.
No. No.
The
It
have
was
not
the same
situation.
thing
She didn't have those resources
Exactly.
that
The
allowed
have-not
for that
situation.
access.
Because that,
Yeah.
what shifted for you.
what that highlights is another aspect, really the insidious aspect of racism, because racism is really just designed to keep an top percent
Keep
of
us
people.
separated.
It's
Right,
economic system.
It keeps
because
us
always
against
been
them.
It's always been economic,
Yeah.
so it was always. That's why they
It
took
goes
the
back to
Irish.
capitalism.
And that's why they took the Irish, right, the poor, and they said, "Oh no, you're not going to be as good as us.
Right.
But what you can do is you can watch these,
Yes.
and you can lord over these.
Right.
Yes.
Right. That's
Said
what
the
they
Lord.
did.
Hierarchy, colonialism, is always about ownership
That's
and
right.
resources and draining the resources
Power.
for the benefit of the few to the
And you
hurt
can
of the
see, and if you
many. You know?
And if you look at this examples of how this is played out, right? So how I use the example like the Irish overseers and the slave plantations, right? You take the people that you separate, and then when they left, everything fell down. These people now they're at odds, and this becomes the white poor, and they're living side to side. Right, and they're making deals, and there comes this strife. You look at what happened in Rwanda, right? This is a symbol. This is a trademark of the institution of white supremacy and the legacy that's left on this planet. Because this is how it creates this strife in other populations. You see the same thing. They took the class that they treated the worst and left them in charge over the one that had all the privilege. And what do you think that society is going to look like when you have these two forces left with virtually no resources?
These are people that didn't even realize they were different until somebody told them they were.
Right. So if you think about if you ever seen that movie, Free State of Jones, it was about a successful not a successful, partially successful rebellion, and it was black and white poor. That's really, in order for supremacy to exist, they have to keep, and that's why another reason why Dr. King was assassinated, because it was the poor people's campaign.
That's what started. Right. Yeah, when we started doing that, they were like, "Oh no,
because then
he gonna change the world. He about to change the world out here."
You get poor white people and poor black people realizing that we're all in the same boat, and right now it's middle class, which is almost disappearing.
There is no such thing as middle class. Like, are we even calling it that still?
And so when you get black and white people realize how much of the same boat we are. That's when
let me just make an announcement. If you're listening and you think you are middle class, stop it. You are poor. If you do not make $250,000 in this country, you are poor.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if you're living direct deposit to direct deposit,
and depending,
you're
because
poor.
you can make $250,000 and you're instructed to accumulate debt, like because we're eating. Because capitalism is eating itself now. It's all financial.
It was never sustainable.
No,
it was never sustainable.
We're all in mortgaged and leased and hawked.
And that's what's all aligned. Bring
what's
it back to
in
what
the
you
money
just
now?
said.
Is the money still being backed?
No,
are we done with
think
that?
about what she said when she first at the beginning of the show. The beginning of the show. It's all a lie, right? It's all a lie.
So you know what? And it is. It's all a lie. And I'm telling you, so I hope is everybody. I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
But I feel like this is a great show.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
I feel like this was an awesome conversation. I'm so grateful for the space that all of you made. I'm so grateful for the insights that each person in this conversation brought to it. I mean, this was absolutely fantastic. So before we go, I want to ask everybody to give me 30 seconds right quick, 30 seconds less than a minute, your wrap up, your takeaway, and what parting words you'd like to have for the show.
Who do you want to go first?
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess I should say I'd recommend reading White Frailty by Robin DiAngelo. Fragility. Sorry. White Fragility. And I recommend diving in with gusto into diverse communities and having uncomfortable conversations, because it is the only kind of bridging we can do. And even if you fail and say the wrong thing, and if we can make some space for progress, that's what we need.
That's what we need.
Peace, love.
Takesha?
So I'm going to say, and my wrap up is for everybody to remember that it is about the journey. It's not about the destination. It's not about the outcome. It's about your experience. And please continue to step outside of your box, operate with an open mind, and operate in love. You'll find a lot of healing for yourself, which is really important throughout this life's journey.
Lachey?
Well, I'm going to just keep it short and simple. The issue is poverty, and racism is a construct to maintain poverty. So when we start having conversations with each other, we'll see that the people we hate have been equally misinformed. And if both groups are focused on holding on to the hate that they picked up along the way, whether it's hate for black people or hate for white people or, anyone else, if you feel that your hate is stronger than your ability to forgive someone, we're going to keep running this circle. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we're all in the same boat.
We are.
Unless you're taking the yacht to work, or if you're going to work, you probably need, if you have a job that you're punching right now and you don't know if you're going to pay your rent with another check, you probably need to stop being so hateful.
Thank you, y'all. My parting thoughts are just a few. Actually, some of these are Catherine's I wanted to highlight. We'll make sure, so for all of us, particularly our white allies and accomplices, or non-black allies and accomplices, recognize the complicity of silence. Thank you for that, Catherine. I think also she talked about otherness. That's very important. I think for all of us, otherness. For all of us that can put somebody into another category, someone can put us into another category. And I think the only way to change that is to be sensitive to that experience. And then one other thing Catherine said is that racism is the water we swim in, y'all.
I wrote
that
one down. Yeah.
Yeah. If you don't recognize,
you're just so used to waking up and swimming in racism. It's normal.
It's normal, right?
You can't even tell it's water.
Right. So I am telling you, this was again. I'm grateful. This was a very. I hope this was a thought-provoking conversation. I hope it inspires people in our community to have conversation. So I'm going to ask you once again to do a couple of things there. Comment your thoughts. If you're listening to this podcast, let us know what you think. Please follow our community. Follow us on social media at OfficialDofD. You can join our community by going to OfficialDofD.com. Click the join button. Last, join our conversation. Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed our show. Tune in every Sunday at 3 p.m. at OfficialDofD.com. Follow us on social media at OfficialDofD. Your dynamic, your dialogue. Come get some.